Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we are exploring self-awareness and personal growth.
Ooh.
And he dives into some really cool concepts about understanding your own why and mastering your reactions to life, basically.
I love that. It can be so hard to kind of figure out why we react the way we do.
Right. So he focuses on these two main ideas, and the first one is called mechanically engineering your thoughts.
Mechanically engineering your thoughts. Interesting.
I know that sounds super technical, but it's actually about deconstructing your motivations and desires to see if they're actually really yours or not.
Oh, I like that.
Are they really you?
Yeah.
And then the second one is chain reaction awareness, which is all about understanding how your feelings and behaviors and past experiences all connect and often keep you stuck in a loop.
Oh, interesting.
So he uses a lot of examples from his own life.
Okay.
Which makes these ideas way easier to grasp and kind of apply to your own life.
Cool. So let's start with this mechanically engineering thoughts.
Okay, let's do it.
What does that actually mean?
So it's about breaking down the why behind everything you do, kind of like an engineer would take apart a machine to understand all the little pieces.
Okay, so you really have to get granular and figure out the why behind the why.
Totally.
Okay.
And George, he argues that a lot of what we want, it actually comes from societal expectations or other people's opinions.
That makes sense.
We chase these goals because we think we should, not because we actually genuinely want to.
That's a great point. So how do we figure out what we really want?
Well, so he talks about, in his own life, he always thought he wanted to be wealthy.
Okay, yeah.
And he thought that was about taking care of his family and, giving them a good life, a comfortable life.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's a pretty common goal. But then he realized that, deep down, his desire for wealth was really rooted in this belief that he needed to, save his family.
Save his family.
Financially rescue them.
Yeah.
And he started to see that this belief actually came from his childhood, where money was always this source of stress.
Oh, interesting.
And anxiety for his family.
Okay, so it wasn't really about the money. It was about the security.
Exactly.
Of his family.
And that security was tied to some deep-seated beliefs that he needed to kind of unpack.
Got it. So how do we do this unpacking?
Well, he suggests that we get really specific about our why.
Okay.
So for example, if you're working towards a promotion, don't just stop at, I want a higher salary.
Right.
Ask yourself, why is a higher salary important to me? And then once you have that answer, ask why again about that answer.
Oh, keep going deeper.
Keep peeling back the layers until you hit the core motivation.
Okay.
You might be surprised what you find.
Yeah, so maybe you want that promotion and you want that higher salary, but really you are just seeking more respect from your peers or even yourself.
Totally. So it's about questioning those deeply ingrained assumptions.
Right.
To figure out if they are actually serving you or not.
I'm loving this. This is giving me so much to think about already. These simple desires we have can have such complicated roots.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
And we need to untangle those before we can actually understand what we want.
So before we move on to chain reaction awareness, can you think of a goal that you're currently chasing or a situation you're struggling with? And maybe try and mechanically engineer your thoughts around it.
Yeah, that's a great challenge for our listeners.
Yeah, see what whys come up.
What whys can you uncover? All right, let's move on to chain reaction awareness.
Okay, let's do it.
So this one is all about understanding the interconnectedness of things. And George uses this brilliant analogy.
Okay.
He compares it to nuclear fusion.
Nuclear fusion? What?
I know, it sounds kind of crazy, but it will make sense in a second.
Okay.
So think about how nuclear fusion, is this continuous reaction that fuels itself.
Okay.
Right? And it's similar with our feelings and our behaviors. We have a feeling that triggers a thought, which leads to a behavior.
Okay.
And then that behavior reinforces the original feeling and the cycle starts all over again.
So it's a never-ending loop?
It's like a never-ending loop, a chain reaction.
Chain reaction. Got it.
And just nuclear fusion can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
These emotional chain reactions can have a huge impact on our lives.
So true.
Sometimes it's a positive chain reaction, but often we get stuck in these negative cycles.
Right, that keep us feeling trapped.
Exactly. So what keeps these negative chains going? What's the fuel?
The fuel, okay.
So George, he believes that one of the biggest fuels is self-sabotage.
Self-sabotage.
Yeah, and he says that sometimes we subconsciously create chaos in our lives because deep down, if we are actually craving change.
Oh, interesting.
It's like we need to hit rock bottom to finally wake up and make a shift.
So before we go any further, think about your own life for a second. Are there any recurring negative emotions or behaviors that you experience? Like maybe you procrastinate on important tasks, or you're constantly seeking validation from others. Whatever it is, just take a moment to acknowledge it.
Right. We all have these patterns.
We do.
So now, here's the key question. Can you trace those patterns back to any potential triggers or unprocessed experiences?
Like maybe a critical comment from a parent, a past relationship, or even a limiting belief that you've been carrying around for years.
This is where it gets really interesting.
I know, right?
And we'll explore how those unprocessed experiences can actually fuel those negative chain reactions.
Okay.
Can we come back? But for now, keep reflecting on those patterns and see what insights you can uncover.
Hopefully you had some time to think about those patterns and triggers we were just talking about.
Yeah, it's crazy how much we just kind of sweep things under the rug, you know?
Oh, it's so true.
But that's what this deep dive is all about, bringing that stuff to light so we can actually deal with it.
Exactly, and that's where chain reaction awareness can be such a powerful tool. Like when you understand how your past experiences, even the ones you try to forget, influence your thoughts and behaviors today.
Right.
You can start to break free from those cycles.
So how do we actually develop this chain reaction awareness?
Well, George, he talks about becoming the witness to your thoughts.
Okay.
He says it's like watching a movie of your own life. Instead of getting caught up in all the drama and just reacting automatically, you're kind of observing those thoughts and feelings from a detached perspective.
Okay, so it's about creating some distance. But how do you actually do that?
He talks about finding quiet. Like really emphasizing that. Because when we're constantly bombarded with noise and distractions, it's impossible to tune in to our inner world.
Right, it's like trying to hear a whisper in a hurricane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he suggests just finding a quiet space, even for a few minutes each day, where you can just sit and observe your breath, your thoughts, your body sensations without judging them.
Okay, so you are creating a space for stillness and reflection.
Yeah.
But what happens when those negative thoughts and feelings do come up?
That's where the witness part comes in.
Okay.
So instead of getting swept away by those emotions, you simply acknowledge them. You might say to yourself oh, there's that anxiety again.
Right.
Or I'm noticing that I'm having these thoughts about that argument I had yesterday.
So you're not trying to ignore those feelings, you're just observing them.
Yes, exactly.
Without getting caught up in the story.
Like watching those thoughts and feelings float by like clouds, you know?
Okay.
You see them, you acknowledge them, but you don't engage.
That sounds challenging.
It is.
But also really powerful.
It is.
Do you think meditation or journaling would be helpful for this witness mindset?
Absolutely. Those are great practices for developing that inner observer. George actually mentions that he uses journaling to process his thoughts and emotions. He says it helps him to untangle those complex knots of feelings and understand those chain reactions that are driving his behavior.
And once you start to understand those chain reactions, you can begin to interrupt them.
Exactly. Like you're a scientist observing a chemical reaction.
Okay.
Once you understand the formula, you can start to experiment with different variables to change the outcome.
So instead of reacting with anger when someone cuts you off in traffic,
right,
you can just pause.
Yeah.
Notice that anger and choose a different response.
Exactly. And it might not be easy at first, but with practice, you can rewire those reactions and create healthier patterns.
So we have talked about how to develop chain reaction awareness. But how does this all connect back to the idea of mechanically engineering your thoughts?
Well, they are actually two sides of the same coin. Mechanically engineering your thoughts is all about understanding the root causes of those chain reactions. Remember George's realization that his desire for wealth was really rooted in his need to save his family.
Right.
That's a perfect example of how a deeply held belief, often coming from childhood experiences, can actually fuel those emotional chain reactions.
So it's about connecting the dots between our past,
Yeah.
our subconscious beliefs, and our reactions today.
Exactly. Like you are becoming a detective of your own life.
And by understanding those connections, we can start to rewrite the script.
Totally. Yeah.
That's really empowering. So we are not victims of our past. We have the power to choose
We do.
how we respond
We do.
in the present.
And George actually gives us another example from his life that illustrates this point.
Okay.
He talks about how he used to have this belief that other people's opinions were more important than his own.
I think a lot of people struggle with that.
I think so too.
Where do you think that comes from?
Well, he traces it back to his childhood. He grew up in a family where he felt like he had to constantly seek approval from his parents. So he developed this pattern of putting everyone else's needs before his own.
It's amazing how those early experiences can stick with us.
I know, it's incredible, right?
Yeah.
But here's the good news. Once he realized he was operating from this old belief system, he could start to challenge it. He started to prioritize his own needs and set healthy boundaries.
That's such a good example of how mechanically engineering your thoughts can lead to real change.
Yeah, it's about identifying those hidden gears that are driving your behavior, figuring out if they need to be replaced or recalibrated.
Okay, so as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, how can our listeners start to apply these concepts to their own lives?
I would say the first step is just to be more aware, pay attention to your thoughts, your feelings, your reactions throughout the day. When you feel those negative chain reactions starting to kick in, just pause, take a breath, and try to be that witness.
And then start asking those why questions.
Yeah, why am I feeling this way? Why am I reacting in this way? What past experience or belief could be fueling this?
That's a great starting point.
Yeah.
It's a journey.
It is.
To self-discovery.
It is.
Be patient with yourself and don't be afraid to dig deep.
So true.
Okay, last question before we move on.
Okay.
We have talked a lot about negative chain reactions, but can we apply these concepts to positive experiences?
That's a great question, and one we will explore more when we come back.
Okay.
But I'll just say this.
Yeah.
Absolutely. By understanding these principles, we can not only break free from negative patterns, but also cultivate more joy, fulfillment, and purpose in our lives.
That's an inspiring thought to leave our listeners with.
It is.
We'll be back soon to delve into that and more. Welcome back to our deep dive. You know, as we've been exploring these concepts of mechanically engineering our thoughts and chain reaction awareness, it's made me realize how much we just operate on autopilot.
Oh, yeah.
Like we go through life reacting to things these habitual ways without even thinking about why we are reacting that way and if it's actually serving us or not.
It's like we are sleepwalking through life instead of being fully present.
Yeah, and this deep dive has really shown me that we have a lot more power than we think. We don't have to be controlled by our past or our subconscious beliefs.
We can make a choice.
It all comes back to choice, right?
Yeah.
Like once we are aware of those chain reactions,
Yeah.
we can choose how we want to respond.
And that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
You become the creator of your experience, not just reacting to it.
You asked a great question before the break about creating positive chain reactions.
I did, yeah.
I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, George, he doesn't actually specifically talk about positive chain reactions in his reflection,
Okay.
but I think the principles still totally apply. Like, just as we can get stuck in negative loops, we can also create positive upward spirals.
So instead of self-sabotage,
Yeah.
we can create self-empowerment.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it all starts with being aware of what your strengths are, what you're passionate about, the things that bring you joy.
Okay, I like this. So how do we turn those things into positive chain reactions?
You gotta feed them.
Feed them.
Yeah, just like you can feed those negative chain reactions without realizing it with your thoughts and behaviors, you can consciously feed the positive ones.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure, let's say you love learning new things. That's a great strength to have, right?
Yeah.
So you might decide to take a class or join a book club or even just spend 30 minutes a day reading something interesting.
Okay, so that's the spark
Yeah, the initial action.
that sets it off.
Exactly. And as you start doing that, you start to feel a sense of accomplishment, maybe even some excitement, and that feeling makes you want to keep learning.
Right.
You know, you seek out new challenges, expand your knowledge, and it just keeps going.
Like a snowball?
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be something external. You can do this with your thoughts too.
Okay, so instead of focusing on the negative, we can focus on the positive.
Totally. When you catch yourself thinking negatively, replace it with a positive affirmation. Celebrate your wins, big or small. And give yourself credit for everything you've accomplished.
So we basically have the power to reprogram our minds for happiness.
I think so. It all starts with that awareness of our chain reactions and mechanically engineering our thoughts and behaviors to be in line with what we truly want.
We covered a lot today. I feel like we have given our listeners so many great tools.
You too.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
let's leave our listeners with something to think about.
Okay.
If you could mechanically engineer one part of your life right now, what would it be and why?
I love that question.
What about you?
Honestly, I think I would focus on mechanically engineering my relationship with time,
Yeah.
like really using it intentionally, enjoying the present moment, but also working towards a future that I am excited about.
That's beautiful. I think that is something we can all relate to.
Yeah, and it's a journey. It's an ongoing process. Be patient and celebrate your wins and never stop exploring.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Keep diving deep, everybody. Keep growing and keep creating a life you love.